Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, the Northside Numbers Game, weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and again, a youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sunranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, and Baseball Rabbit Hole. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts. Just search for Bleacher Bunch. And CubsPS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, where you can support the show and always get a variety of benefits for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. Spin on the baseball metric, OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it, please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share the episode with a friend. It's September 25th, 2024. The Cubs are 81-77, and they're in Philly for the rubber game tonight before coming home to finish the season against the Reds. It's the end of a long season, one that almost nobody is happy about, Craig Counsell included. Let's get into it. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Welcome into episode 89, the Robert Stock episode of this podcast. No, not Robert Stack from Unsolved Mysteries, Robert Stock. You might remember him from such games as his one start in 2021. Today I'm going to talk about process and losses. There's been a lot of that the last couple weeks, and really process and loss. I mean, that's what this season has been. I mean, this is the most disappointing season in my Cubs fandom since 2004. And before that, you probably have to go back to 1985. 1985, when the Cubs were trying to follow up their division win in 84 and looked really good the first part of the season. And then the entire starting rotation went on the injured list within the span of 3 weeks. And many of them were out for quite a while. So that's kind of a lost cause. The 2004 team also had a lot of injuries. Really should have been better. I mean, the team kind of choked it down the stretch. That was a year, Mark Pryor and Kerry Wood couldn't stay healthy. They traded for Nomar Garciaparra, who got hurt after the trade. Just it was a mess of a season that ended up with the players feuding with the announcers. It was the last season for Sammy Sosa as a Cub. It was just a lost year, and that's kind of how this one feels. What's funny, though, is I don't think anybody's been happy about this season. I think a lot of people were not happy with what the Cubs built coming into the season, which is reflected now because the Cubs are probably going to come in right around where they were projected to be. When I did my analysis before the season, and I'll go back and revisit those once the season's over, I say it all the time. There's always plenty of time to be mad once all is lost, and now all is lost. So now there's going to be plenty of time to be mad. There's going to be a full month plus, depending on how long the World Series goes, where the Cubs really can't make moves. I mean, they can drop guys, they can just make non-tender decisions. Players will decide on options, most notably Cody Bellinger, but nothing official really happens other than continuing to pick up guys who are out as free agents or guys who get waived by other teams. There's no real transactions, no trades, no free agent signings, none of that stuff until 5 days after the World Series is over. So there's going to be a whole 30 plus days for Cubs fans with nothing going on. We'll just get to stew in the juices of what was the 2024 season. And on this podcast, I'll break down a lot of things. I'm going to go back and revisit preseason projections, go back and take a look at some of the mailbag episodes I had where people would ask questions about what I thought would happen this season. But before the season started, most of the betting lines had the Cubs between 83 and 86 wins. Most commonly, they were like 84 and a half was a very common over-under at that point. And I think a lot of people felt pretty good, even though I think most of us would agree the Cubs didn't do enough in this offseason. I think a lot of us felt pretty good taking the over. I know I did. I picked this team to win 90 games. I figured they would be trending toward that 86 to 88 win mark, be more aggressive at the trade deadline, which I think they would have been if they would have been having that kind of a season. And then when you go acquire something big at the deadline, go get a closer, go get a big bat, go get that one more starting pitcher, whatever it is you need at that point, would propel them to a good finish and finish with 90 wins. I thought they would win the division. I did not see Milwaukee being this good. And we have weeks and weeks now to get into all the hows and the whys and all that stuff. But right now it's all coming to an end. The story's not finished yet, but we're clearly in the following action. The We hit peak drama a few weeks ago when the Cubs actually went on a really good run on a road trip, then came home and lost 2 out of 3 to the Pirates. That probably about ended it. But then they lost, 2 out of 3 to the Yankees, but then they won 2 out of 3 in LA. It's like, maybe there's a very slim bit of hope there. I was on here a lot talking about the math, get to 88, 89 wins. It looks now like the third wild card might wind up being about 90. Let's take a look at where that race is right now. Padres are gotten hot. They're kind of running away with the wild card and giving the Dodgers a little bit of a push for that division. They're only 2 games back. But right now, the Padres already have 91 wins. They've clinched a postseason berth. The Mets are at 87, as are the Diamondbacks, and the Braves are at 86. So obviously the Mets and Phillies are playing each other, just played each other. But coming into the last weekend, I mean, if everybody loses out, the Cubs would have had to have gotten to 88 wins to get to the wild card. Obviously, they can't, sitting at 81 right now. And odds are pretty good that somebody's going to win another game or two. So, the Cubs probably would have had to have gotten to 90 wins to make a wild card this year. That's where the Brewers are right now. So if the Cubs were pushing 90 wins, they'd still maybe be in contention a little bit for the wild card or for the division race. And probably if the Cubs were better, that probably would have resulted in a potential difference in head-to-head versus the Brewers. So that could have directly affected things. But we'll get into hows and the whys and the whats. Right now, I hope the Cubs stay ahead of the Cardinals. I guess I'll take a little bit of joy as a strong word for that, but I'll take a little enjoyment from it. And I want to talk about the season being over. There's a certain amount of processing, like what was this season? Because it's right now, everybody's kind of in that sore spot where like right after the breakup, where everything's still a little bit touchy, a little bit sore, a little bit raw, and people want harsh changes. I go around, looking at social media and I see a lot of calls for DFAs and non-tenders and all that stuff. I saw a post today on Twitter, X, under discussion of what the Cubs should do in the offseason. And it was, see if I can find the one. It was in response to a tweet by Michael Ernst talking about his offseason plan, which I think is fairly sound. I mean, he points out that the Cubs already have 26 acceptable players to build a similar team to what they had this year. Obviously, the Cubs could decide to run it back. If they decide to run it back, unless, kids grow, it's probably going to be hard to be much better. But his larger point is, I'll just read the tweet to start. My Cubs offseason plan: devote any and all resources to big game hunting. Already have 26 acceptable players to build a similar team in 2025. With young upside for depth, they need impact to take the next needed step. Get an ace, get a closer or two, get a big bat or two. It's hard to argue with that. I mean, the Cubs do not need to spend this offseason doing what Jed often does and adding those small pieces in the margins. They don't need another back of the rotation starter. They don't need another bench bat. Now, if you want to swap out and get a different kind of profile, I'm not saying they can't sign another bench bat, but that doesn't need to be the focus. They need to focus on and even in the bullpen, the Cubs have picked up enough arms, enough young hard throwers with some team control. They've got some of their own. Porter Hodge, Luke Little have all looked good at different points this year. Now they got Jack Neely, they got Nate Pearson. They have a bunch of upside arms in the pen. Hopefully they'll get some of their injured players back, like Quincy Almonte. Adbert Alzolay won't pitch next year for the most part, unless maybe it's way late in the season. What they need to add is they need to add impact. Go big game hunting. I can still make the argument that Porter Hodge could be acceptable at closer next year, but they absolutely have to add one or two impact bullpen arms. Doesn't necessarily have to be a closer. Probably, though, a guy or two who could be plan B, plan C at closer should Hodge struggle, should Hodge get injured, however that goes. And probably at least one of them should be a lefty. But, scrolling down through the comments, I found another one following up on that where, from John Hanley, artist. How can any of the 26 Accepto players be brought back? This team sucks as it is. Dramatic changes have to be made. Obviously, the Cubs are not cutting ties with 26 players. First of all, they have a few guys under contract already that would have to be traded. A couple of those guys have no trade clauses. And so it's, right now we're in the painful stage where everything kind of sucks. Who has to go? And the reality is somebody probably has to go. I've talked about it already. We'll talk about it more this offseason. But if you're going to bring in one or two big impact bats, where are they going to play? You're either going to take a current starter and make him a bench player, or you're probably going to move a starter or two to make room for those new bats. Cubs also have Cubs minor league player of the year and Southern League MVP. Matt Shaw is pretty much big league ready. James Triantos is big league ready or very close. Owen Casey, Kevin Alcantara Owen Casey is probably big league ready now. Kevin Alcantara is getting closer. Moises Ballesteros is close. So you've got a lot of top 100 level talent in AAA knocking at the door. And the Cubs can't have next season. 2025 can't be a rebuilding year where you just make a bunch of moves, plug in some kids, and hope for the best. I mean, it's presumably reports are out there. The Jed Hoyer is not going to get extended. I don't think he'll get fired either. So he's going to go into next year as a lame duck year. And you just can't have another rebuilding year. This isn't a year where they can just aim for, let's hope we win 80 games and see what the kids can do, or hope we catch lightning in a bottle. So I think it's okay to add major league talent, keep a lot of the major league talent they have. They don't have to create a gap in the lineup for Matt Shaw. But the time may come where Matt Shaw or James Triantos or Owen Casey or Moises Ballesteros or Kevin Alcantara effectively force your hand, give you no choice. They could play so well for stretches that they forced their way up. Kyle Schwarber did that. Wilson Contreras did that. Chris Bryant did that. Javi Baez did that. And that's fine. That would be a good outcome. We'll figure this stuff out. I mean, the Cubs have some positives from this season. Michael Busch showed a lot of growth in his rookie year. We saw Ian Happ have a career year. Seiya Suzuki, when he's been healthy, has been largely excellent. He and Happ have been like just under that tier of star bat that the Cubs need. If the Cubs were to add a star bat, or if Cody Bellinger got back to being that guy, all of a sudden that lineup looks so much deeper because you've got Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki have essentially proven themselves to be 120, 125, pushing 130 WRC plus hitters at this point. Those are big run producers. The Cubs really need somebody, though, in that 140, 150 plus range. And that becomes suddenly the anchor. Now, all of a sudden, you've got that one big bat makes Seiya and Happ a little bit better. Makes it a little bit more okay for Dansby to be a glove-first shortstop who's going to be streaky and have some power. Michael Busch, I think, can be a 120 WRC plus guy, too. So he can give that depth in the lineup. PCA, we'll see what he grows into. He's shown tremendous strides this year. So, processing this season is going to be about really being able to step back from it. So I'm going to do this piecemeal over time. I'm not going to give my full breakdown of the season today, but I want to step back and look at what worked and what didn't. Because as much as this season feels like a failure right now, as much as I'm more disappointed in this season than I have been in a long, long time with the Cubs season, it's a little bit too soon to really be able to give things their proper due. I think we've seen the last of Sho Imanaga. I think he made his last start yesterday. He had an amazing season, sub-3 ERA, all of his metrics line up. I heard a bit on the most recent episode 2222 of Effectively Wild, 2,222, because yes, they put out that much content. Friend of the show, Ben Lindbergh, does a great job, but he and Meg Rowley today from Fangraphs it wasn't today. I think the episode might have come out today. I don't remember. I listened to it today. They were talking about Sho at one point, and they actually compared his metrics, and he came over from Japan to a higher level of baseball and actually had a better season than what he had in Japan last year. It's amazing. He's so much fun to watch. He was so good. He got let's look at his final numbers for the year. He made 29 starts, 173 innings, 25% K rate, 4% walk rate. That's incredible. For all the talk about being a fly ball pitcher and all the home runs he would give up, he was third on the team in homers per 9, but it was only 1.5. Like it wasn't that high. The homer problem was not that bad. Some of it is the Wrigley Field played very much like a pitcher's park this year, so it was a very friendly place to pitch all the time. But I thought Sho did a really good job. He really got crushed in 2 outings. The rest of the time he was pretty good. And often when he gave up a home run, it was a solo shot because he's not walking guys and getting himself in trouble. 2.91 ERA, 3.72 FIP, 3.63 expected FIP. He was for Fangraphs WAR, he was a 3.1 win player. Just such a really, really good season, and he's so much fun to watch. So much fun. The Cubs had Justin Steele, kind of an injury-plagued year, only made 24 starts. I'm going to guess he'll be done with 4 games remaining. Actually, maybe Shota might get one more start in. We'll see. He might pitch the final day, or they might just go bullpen day at the end. But Justin Steele still went 134 innings over 24 starts, 3.07 ERA. It didn't really feel like he was as good this year. He got off to an awful start after he pitched really well on opening day and then obviously hurt himself, missed several weeks. When he came back, he struggled, took him a little bit to find his command and get the feel back. But then he went on a run where he was pitching really, really well for a good long stretch. Had another injury towards the end of the season. I was a little surprised they brought him back for these last 2 starts, given, he's had elbow issues before. But, if his elbow resolved and he's healthy, then let him continue to build up the innings. I think that would bode well for last year. Jameson Taillon went 158 innings and 27 starts, really wound up only missing probably about 5 starts with his injury to start the year. 3.41 ERA, 3.94 FIP, 4.12 expected FIP. Steele was a 3-win player. JMO was a 2.2 win player. But this team still just coulda, shoulda, woulda been better. And we heard that this week on comments from Jameson Taillon and Craig Counsell. So Counsell famously came over from the Brewers after last season. And the thinking was that Counsell was going to be a managerial upgrade over David Ross. I'm going to try to dig in and do a manager comp episode sometime during this offseason. It's a really hard thing to quantify. I'm a big believer that the manager, unless you're really historically terrible or historically great, really doesn't make that much difference. I think it's way more about the collection of talent, about how the players fit together, what kind of pieces the manager has to work with. And then some managers might be a few games better than others. I never thought Ross was as bad as a lot of fans did. I thought a lot of what we were seeing was organizational. And I think the fact that we've seen a lot of the same things this year with Craig Counsell in there shows that it's organizational. I think there's a certain amount of playing within a margin. There's a certain amount of, we'll talk about spending a bunch this offseason too, but, spending I don't think is the biggest issue. I do wish the Cubs would spend more. I wish they would spend higher, at least on a player level. Like, go give out a $200+ million contract. Go get one big superstar. The team money at the CBT threshold, I don't think is enough for the Cubs given their revenue position and who they are and what market they're in. But it's certainly enough. Teams win spending less money than this all the time. So it's not the money holding them back. It's how they're spending that money that's holding them back. And Craig Counsell talked about it. I'm going to probably get Brendan Miller on the show again later. I had him on early in the season or right at the tail end of the preseason. And we're going to talk about process again. He hammers it all the time. You have to aim for 90 to 95 win teams because shit happens every year. Guys get hurt. Some guys have down years. Sometimes you get crushed with injuries at a particular position. I mentioned the 1985 Cubs. You can have depth. You can be a deep team, but no team, unless you're really built to be almost a super team, can withstand that level of injury where, in the span of 3 weeks, your entire starting rotation is on the injured list. Now, the Dodgers have kind of dealt with that this year, but the Dodgers were built to be a super team. They have Mookie Betts, and they signed Yoshinobu and Walker Buehler, and they picked up Tyler Glasnow and Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman, and just guy after guy after guy, just dude after dude after dude on that team. When you go into a season expecting to win 96 to 100 games, you've got some variance in there. You can absorb some injuries, underperform a little bit, and still win your division with, it looks like they're 93 wins now. They'll probably get to 94, 95, probably win their division. So be 4 or 5 games maybe under expectations, and then you can point to injury and say, yeah, the injuries cost us, but we were a good enough team and deep enough team to overcome that. Braves, similarly, it looks like the Braves are probably going to miss the playoffs, although they could still sneak in this last weekend. But that's a team that was looking like a 98+ win baseball team. And then, again, you just can't lose the star power they've lost. I mean, they lost Ronald Acuna to a torn ACL before the All-Star break. They lost Spencer Strider pretty much the entire season. And that's, a top 5 player in baseball and a Cy Young contender, missing huge chunks of the season. And Ozzie Albies has missed, 6 weeks twice. They lost Austin Riley. I mean, they've lost some really, really good players. And you can have depth, but sometimes that it's hard to make that depth up. But they did have enough depth that they're still going to win 88, 87, 88, 89 games. And so maybe they sneak in the playoffs. If they do, it's because they aimed for 95 plus, so that when you miss, you're still in play. The Cubs kind of aim for 85, 86. Even though I predicted them at 90 wins, they did not have a 90-win roster to start the season. I thought they would get there by making additions at the trade deadline. And they didn't, because they didn't play like a 86, 87, 88 win team. They had a losing record there. At one point, they were 10 games under 500. I mean, they were a bad baseball team for 2 months of the season. So Craig Counsell talked about it. You have to aim higher. Jameson Taillon echoed it too. Like, they have to be better. They have to go into next season expecting to win the division, expecting to win 90 plus baseball games. I'd love for them to aim for 95, but at least aim for 90, 92. The third wild card, I say it often, 86 is going to get you in more often than it won't. So that's kind of the floor of where you need to be. But if you're aiming for that, you need upside to get to 90. You need, a little downside takes you completely out of the race, like the Cubs saw this year. And so it's putting those pieces together. So it's not a matter of this Cubs team being terrible. They're not. They're a good, solid, arguably mid baseball team. That's just where they are right now. If the Cubs lose out, they'll be 81 and 81. I don't think they will. And we have to process that. We're going to process what worked, what didn't. The Cubs have taken shots at a lot of bullpen arms lately. They've got some interesting guys they've picked up on waivers. Some won't be around next year. Some might be big parts of the bullpen next year. Players also fluctuate in performance. Will Shota Imanaga be as good next year when the league has a whole book on him for a whole offseason? I think there's plenty of reason to suggest that he'll be good, but he'll also be 31. I'm not expecting a big age-related decline at this point. Justin Steele seems established. Jameson Taillon is getting older, but he's shown he's fixed some things in Chicago, both last year and this year. Javier Assad, what can they add to this? Can Ben Brown stay healthy? Can Jordan Wicks stay healthy? Can Cade Horton get healthy and come up? I mean, Brandon Birdsell made a big push this season to be close to Major League ready. So we want to process this and figure out what the Cubs have. But I think the Cubs are in a position where, as noted in that tweet I cited earlier, they don't need a number 4 starter. They don't need 2 just sort of middle inning bullpen arms, just kind of go eat some innings. They need impact. They need guys who you can trust to bring in the 7th with 2 guys on base when the starter gets in trouble. They need if you look at Porter Hodge as a closer, you need basically a second option at closer. You need a lefty you can count on to be shut down in a big spot. And for a bat, they have a good, solid lineup. I mean, if you look at this team offensively, Seiya Suzuki leads them with a 136 WRC plus this year. That's outstanding. Now, can he stay healthy? So far every year he's been in Chicago, he's missed at least a month, commonly with core injuries. Ian Happ at 125. Those are 2 very good hitters to start with. Michael Busch was 119. Can he continue to grow? We have, Mike Tauchman. Maybe he'll be back as the 4th outfielder. Good, solid bench bat. Plays good D across the entire outfield. Had a 111 WRC plus following up on his great season last year. Cody Bellinger fell off a little bit, but he's still slashed 267, 326, 431, 110 WRC plus. So he's not the 120 plus, 130 WRC plus guy the Cubs were hoping to get out of him. But he's a guy who has cut down his strikeout rate. He's become a better hitter since coming to the Cubs. Power was down a little bit this year for a bunch of reasons. I think a huge one of which was him running into the wall in center field and having those 2 cracked ribs. Came back very quickly from that. And funny. You have a core injury, you have rib injuries, and you lose power for a couple months. He didn't really get his power back until after he got hit by a pitch and broke the finger. So just places to go. I mean, so Dansby Swanson was down this year. Nico Horner was a little bit off, but he's usually like a 105, 106 WRC plus player. He was 100 this year, basically league average. So you have an elite glove, solid contact bat over there, hit 272, 333, 362. Dansby's power was down this year again. Like he played for weeks on a bad knee, and that certainly had to hurt him. He's been coming on late in the season, which has been good to see. But the Cubs want to get more out of him next year. Now, I don't think he's 30, but I don't think he's hitting an age curve at this point. I think it was a down year. I think it was a year where he was impacted by injuries. But I think he's a guy that now that he's in his 30s, though, needs to be getting a little bit more rest. So again, add depth that you can use. And I think there were reports about tension in the Cubs front office. I think a lot of that tension came out when Craig Counsell made his comments over the last few days, or over the last week, really. I think there's tension between Craig Counsell and Jed Hoyer, or at least Craig Counsell in the front office. I think Counsell did not use the bench very much this year, and that's something he did a lot of in Milwaukee. He was constantly juggling parts and swapping guys out, had platoons going, was kind of had a reputation as being a master of the bullpen. And we just kind of saw a lot of the same old. But I think the Cubs bench this year was bad. Now, in some ways, I would also argue my one big criticism of Counsell this year is not using the bench. I think even if you don't think they're good players, I think the starters need more rest than they typically got this year. And also, even if Miles Mastrobuoni or Patrick Wisdom or Nick Madrigal or whoever is back there is not a good hitter, they're not getting any better by never playing. And so there would literally be stretches where a guy like Mastrobuoni or David Bodie or lately Luis Vasquez would be on the bench, literally not play for 10 days, 2 weeks, maybe even longer. And then all of a sudden you need to put them in either because the guy got hurt or you're pinch hitting for a struggling catcher in a late game situation. Where's the expectation that player is going to do anything? He hasn't gotten a rep in 2 weeks. So the bench has to be better. And so they need to make the bench, whether it's kids forcing their way up, and that's how Owen Casey and Triantos or Moises Ballesteros or some of those guys push their way in, or non-tendering some guys, not bringing back Patrick Wisdom, not bringing back Nick Madrigal, not bringing back maybe a Miles Mastrobuoni for somebody better on that bench that Craig Counsell can trust and use. The one thing I'll say about Mastrobuoni, of the ones I named, he's maybe the most likely to stay because he can also play shortstop, but it may come down to him or Vasquez. So they're going to need somebody on that team that can be the de facto third shortstop. And it's somebody who probably has options because that third shortstop doesn't have to be on the major league roster all the time. Because if Dansby just gets a day off, as long as he's still here, Nico Horner can play shortstop, and then they've got a bajillion guys that can play second base. So processing this season, process what happened, what could be, where do you have needs? I think there are things to like about the bullpen. And again, I agree with that tweet so much. The Cubs have a lot of money coming off the books. Drew Smiley's gone. Kyle Hendricks, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, is going to be gone. Cody Bellinger, I would say, is probably 60-40 to stay. I see a lot of people acting like it's a no-brainer that he's going to opt back in because nobody's going to give him north of $27 million a year. That is true, but I also think there would be teams out there that would offer him a 4, 5, 6-year deal at less money per year that would still perhaps even double what he has left still coming from the Cubs if he opts into his last 2 seasons. But I think there's a pretty good chance he opts in next year. I think he would probably opt out the year after that. But we'll see. I think it's very much a non-zero chance that he opts out. If he opts out, then the Cubs get another $27 million to add to the pile. All that dead money on Trey Mancini, Tucker Barnhart, Yan Gomes is gone. So there will be money there to spend. And so the Cubs will have an opportunity there'll be a few arb raises. I mean, Justin Steele will probably be the biggest one, depending on which guys on the bench they keep. Talkman, Wisdom, Madrigal could all be in line for some. Javier Assad, think hits arbitration this year. We'll do a financial look through the team here in a couple weeks when it's over. But there's gonna be money to spend, so they'll have a shot to spend big. Now, there seems to be a consensus whether it's actually coming from inside the Cubs clubhouse or whether it's just based on we all have eyes and we all see what happens every offseason. The Cubs will not be aggressive toward Juan Soto, who would very, very easily be the number one bat to get this offseason. And we'll see what happens with him. I think he'll probably test free agency because that's the way he's always been pointed. He famously turned down huge extensions in both Washington and San Diego. I think he really wants to hit the market. But, if he loves it in New York and he loves playing with Aaron Judge and the Yankees, everybody has a number. Even if I want to hit the market, I probably still have a number where I wouldn't hit the market. Just you offered it to me, boom, I got it, let's go. And so, the Yankees have 5 days after the World Series is over to negotiate exclusively with him. This is how Edwin Diaz stayed with the Mets in free agency 2 off seasons ago. But there'll also be a million other options. The Cubs can trade. Trades exist. They have good depth to trade from. They've got some major league ready players who could be dealt. They've got some major league players who could be dealt. Nico Horner is still young and he still has a very friendly contract and it's not very long. It's not a ton of money. Gold glove defense. He could also play shortstop. There's a scenario where Nico Horner is maybe more valuable to a team that needs a shortstop than he is to the Cubs. So there are a million paths this offseason and I won't try to get into all of them now, but it's kind of starting that processing and I chose processing because, Craig Counsell talked about process. I think the Cubs process has been flawed. I think a lot of Cubs shows have talked about it. I know I have. Sun Ranto show has. I see a lot of it out on social media. I mean, it's the not taking a big risk. They've done a good job building up the farm system. They have done a good job finding well-priced players to sort of plug in and go. Like they found some good bargains. They've done a pretty good job remaking bullpens on the fly. Now this year it took too long. The should have happened before late June. But it's pretty common for a team to have a bullpen struggle. And Craig Counsell, as many good bullpens as he's had in Milwaukee, he said it to start the year. Like it sometimes takes a few weeks for everybody to settle into roles, figure out what's what. So I don't mind that so much. I think the Cubs will get there. The Cubs made some great moves this year, picking up Tyson Miller, Jorge Lopez. I like some of the guys they've gotten late in the season. They look interesting. But what are they going to do this offseason? So that'll be the story. We'll have plenty of time to talk about it. The last thing I want to talk about today, speaking of loss, I mean, there's the loss of a season and there's also the loss of a favorite. I mean, so this season's over. As disappointing as this season was, I'm not going to have long lingering special feelings about this season. Obviously, we all do with 2016, but I've got some other favorites where the team wasn't good or team wasn't great, but left me with good memories. Maybe the team was better than I thought they would be. Maybe it was a year where we saw the emergence of a player that would later become a star or become a Cub favorite. I remember 1997, the year before Kerry Wood, obviously. That was when Sammy Sosa was really starting to come on as a power hitter. I want to say he hit 40 home runs and he missed the last 3-4 weeks, maybe longer. He got hit by a pitch and broke his hand. So it really looked like he was, I didn't see 60 homers coming, but it did really look like he was gearing up and that was something to be excited about. The season isn't going to be that. I'm not going to sit back in the year 2044 and think, man, what could have been? I may think what could have been in 2024, but I'm probably going to barely remember who was on this team, honestly. And unless next year becomes great. And obviously I'll remember the guys that were here, but it's still the loss of a season. We, especially someone like me that's got a show and talks about it and comes up with content and thinks about what to talk about during the season, setting up what I think the season is going to be before the season starts. Like it's a thing. It's like a friend that's been with us since March, depending on how you follow spring training. It's baseball's there for us almost every day. And even when they drive us absolutely bonkers, make us absolutely crazy, it's still there. There's still a game. There's a game. There's still a game tomorrow. There's a game tonight. Tomorrow's an off day, but then there's one more series. There's, one more Friday 120, one more Saturday game, one more game to end the season Sunday. And then when that's gone, there's still the playoffs, and I know we're in football season and all that, but I miss baseball, and especially I miss Cubs baseball. So at that point, it's going to be 6 months before Cubs baseball is back. We'll wait around, and then that'll be the birth of something new, and the 2025 Cubs will be something. Even if they roll this team back, the 2025 season will be its own thing. It'll be something new, something to look forward to or dread or whatever the position winds up being over the offseason. But I still feel the loss of a season at the end of a year. And this year in particular, it has not been a particularly good year for Kyle Hendricks, but I think we're about to see his last start. I don't know which game they'll give him in the Cincinnati series. I hope it's Saturday or Sunday. Give him a weekend start. Hopefully they get a good crowd out there. Hopefully he can pitch well. He's special. I think he's not a Hall of Famer. He's not going to Cooperstown. He should be in the Cubs Hall of Fame someday. But this is a guy who his stuff was always better than people gave him credit for. That people would look at the velocity and, he's never very impressive. But I mean, for years and years and years and years, he was one of the best pitchers in baseball without velocity. Like early in his career, he could get it up over 90 a little bit for the most part. 90's been about his cap. He's been 90 some this year to get his velo back. A couple of years ago when he was really struggling, had that shoulder injury. He missed. He was down in velocity and he was getting hammered, and it was showed. But for a really long time, he was arguably certainly probably a top 10 pitcher in baseball. I mean, so you look at it, the Cubs picked him up in a trade for Ryan Dempster in 2014. He came over, made 13 starts that year when you could see the Cubs starting to get better the second half of 2014. He had a 2.46 ERA. It was his first 13 starts in the majors. Everything he's done in the majors has been with the Cubs. He had 13 starts in 2014. 2015, he threw 180 innings and had a sub-4 ERA, 3.95, 3.2 win pitcher. In 2016, he threw 190 innings, led the majors in the ERA at 2.13. Was a 4.2 win player. little bit of injury problem early in 2017, but he threw 140 innings in a 3.03 ERA. He threw 199 innings in 2018, 3.44 ERA on a team that won 95 games. 177 innings in 2019 at a 3.46 ERA. His Fangraph WAR totals through leading up to 2020 were 1.6 because he only made 13 starts, 3.2, 4.2, 2.5, 3.4, 4.1. I mean, he was just a dude that would go out there and take the ball and give you what you needed every single time. If you want to get into some of the advanced stats and look at ERA minus, that's calculated on Fangraphs. So ERA minus is kind of like WRC plus, but in reverse. So it's basically spins off ERA, 100 is league average. And for this one, it's like golf. You want to be low. So 100 is league average. In 2014, those 13 starts, he had a ERA minus of 68. His worst season before 2020 was 2015, where he had a 101. In 2016, he had a 51 ERA minus. 78 if you want to look at FIP minus, which is the same thing, 100 league average, and you want to be under that. I mean, that's elite level stuff. 70 in 2017, 86 in 2018, 78 in 2019, 65 in 2020, whatever 2020 was. Now it's flipped. The last, we got criticism last year. There were people mad that the Cubs picked up his option, but last year in 2023, he had a 3.74 ERA. Didn't necessarily win a lot of games, 2.7 wins above replacement. His ERA minus was 88. So he was very much an above average starter last year, which, maybe the $17 million he's making this year is a lot for what you would expect to get from Kyle Hendricks, but plenty of reason to bring it in. Now, this year has been rough. This year, for a while, his ERA was up over 12. It's pretty much lived above 6 most of the season. His ERA minus is 156. That's kind of the anti-2016. That's not where you want to be. But this dude is on his way out. I'm fully resigned to that. I fully expect it. And that's actually what I want to happen. The Cubs, after what he's shown this year, the Cubs can't bring him back. I think Kyle Hendricks knows it. He's made comments. Somebody posted in the Sun Ranto Show Discord a graphic pulled from an interview with him. And let me pull it in front of me, the quote from Kyle Hendricks that he said on Cubs Live on Marquee. You just soak in every day and you really don't want to think about the end, said you really just soak it in every day and you really don't want to think about the end, to be honest with you. Like he knows it's coming. And so this is a guy, in addition to all the stats I just laid out, you want to sit down and think about what are the biggest games the Cubs have played probably ever in franchise history, certainly at least in generations. It's Game 6 of the 2016 NLDS when Kyle Hendricks just shoved the ball down the Dodgers' throat and beat Clayton Kershaw to put the Cubs in the World Series. And it's Game 7 of the World Series, which Kyle Hendricks started and put the Cubs in position to win. Now, he didn't get the win. Famously, they blew the lead. He also didn't get left in through 5 innings through really no fault of his own. I will go to my grave saying they pulled him too early. I get all the reasons why. But, those 2 games, probably the 2 biggest games in the history of a franchise that goes back 160 years. Certainly the biggest one since the 20s or 30s. And dude just stepped up and got it done, So keep respect on his name. Send him out in style. He should get a gigantic ovation whenever it is he leaves the mound for the last time. And I hope they pull a mid-inning. Like, let it be that thing. On this, I saw today on Twitter, on this day in 2016 was the day that David Ross played his last regular season game, homered in his last at-bat because that's what David Ross does in last at-bats, apparently. And wound up being the only time in my life I can ever remember a manager coming out to take out the catcher mid-inning. And Joe Madden went out, hooked up, Wilson Contreras was ready to come in, went out, did a mound visit, took the ball. David Ross, it's the most hilarious video ever because David Ross has no idea what to do with himself. He just tries to hide under the mask for as long as possible. But he's shaking hands, doesn't really understand how to walk off. And he gets one of the biggest ovations at Wrigley I've ever seen. He's 2 or 3 curtain calls, no pitch clock back then. And it was such a moment. Let's give Kyle Hendricks that this weekend. So that's the loss I'm not yet ready for. This season, I'll process it when it's over. I know it's coming. I'll be a little tiny bit glad when it's gone. But I'm gonna miss Kyle Hendricks, man. Dude was absolutely one of my favorites. He'll be a guy I remember for a long, long time. He threw, was at his peak as my oldest son was coming up as a pitcher, and my oldest became a average-ish velocity high school pitcher, but for a long time, he was a bit of a soft tosser. And, he kind of adopted, he and I talked about Kyle Hendricks a lot, look, if you locate, if you've got a good changeup, if you've got good secondary pitches and you can mix it up, move around the zone, change speeds, you can be effective without throwing 100 miles an hour. And so it was cool to have that. And so it really is, he doesn't pitch anymore. He's off to college and that part of it's over. And Kyle Hendricks' career is coming, at least with the Cubs, is coming to an end. So it's the end of an era, and I'm a little bit sad about it. That's the one I'm not quite ready for, but whichever game it is he starts, I'll definitely be tuned in. I want to see it. I want to see him go out well. But more to come. There's so much to talk about this offseason. I've talked about, I'm going to break down some of Jed's trading history because I want to do a podcast about trades. Sarah Sanchez is going to come on the podcast once the season's over, and we're going to talk through, and we're each going to kind of propose redos of last offseason just to give perspective on what could have been done within the same amount of cash. I think those will be interesting. We'll get into moves the Cubs do make. We'll talk about the playoffs. So much to get into, but this one, it's just about processing, getting to the end of the season. And that's where we are. That's where it's going to be. So if you're still hanging on this season, if you're still listening to this podcast, thank you. If you're still watching the Cubs, we got 4 left, man. Game tonight, 3 at home at Wrigley. If you can get out there, get out there. I was able to go. The Toronto series was my last trip out this year. Special place. And we're all going to miss it till it comes back next spring.
Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and review wherever it is you get your podcasts, and share the episode with a friend.
Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. As always, you can find this show by searching Bleacher Bunch in your podcatcher of choice. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. And check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!